recall that, but I didn't have any of my materials in front of me, and my lecture notes, which were the only document that I had, didn't have that distinction in them. And so I gave you bad information. I told you that it was a distinction that we saw in some of the civil law, jurisdictions in Guyana or St. Lucia, and that was a confusion on my part. These are old terms. These are old and these are old terms that are used in ways that we don't use them anymore. Chattel real is the reference to a lease. And you'll remember that I've referred on a couple of times that chattels real are that leases are not real property, they're personal property, and so that is the term that is used. Chattel personal is everything else. Been asked privately to indicate my office hours. The office hours should be on the syllabus. If they're not, I will add them when I get back to the office. So, okay. So, looks like we have a couple of extra folks coming in. Okay. We're going to pause here for just a minute and let SITs, give SITs a minute to fill up. If they haven't shown up in a couple of minutes, we'll resume. So.
Property, that is land, and personal property is everything. And under personal property, we have chattel real and pure personal property. And then chattel real is leasehold.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So real property and personal property, real property is land, separate from chattel real, right? So separate, right?
Right.
And chattel real is under personal property.
Yes.
Okay, I just.
Yes, yeah. So chattels are personal property. The chattel real is an old term for a lease. Okay, pre-1925 term for a lease. The chattel personal is everything else. Okay, so these are old terms.
And chattel personal also is pure personal.
Yep. Everything that is personal property that isn't a lease. So, okay. All right. So with that, right, this actually gives us a helpful transition to what we're going to be talking about the next couple of weeks, which is the fixtures doctrine. And the first question that we have to deal with when we are handling fixtures, when we're asking ourselves about fixtures, is what is a fixture? What is a fixture? Yes, Travis, right?
Yes.
Okay, yes, Travis.
A fixture would be something that, although was initially part of the land, like for example, the stone, but it became a part of the land over time. For example, buildings, trees, or those things, so that there's so attached and fixed to the land that if they are removed, it would damage or destroy the land.
Yes, did you? So I think Travis is about 95% of the way there. The only thing that I would disagree with Travis on, and what Travis said, is that what makes that a fixture is something that has acquired the character of being attached to the land over time. I would say that there's no time component that's necessary. the time component can be helpful evidence, particularly if there's a question of whether it's a fixture. But if the requisite intent is there and the requisite annexation is there, an item can become a fixture sort of at the point that it is attached to the land, right?
So what about these that were not initially meant to be fixtures, but by nature of their use and their purpose, they end up becoming as that person's?
Right. You're absolutely right. That's why I say that time can be relevant evidence, but it isn't necessary. Right? So there's absolutely circumstances where what you're talking about is what happens, right? Where the item is not a fixture at the point in time that it sort of comes onto the land, but it acquires that character over time through use and annexation, right? So you're absolutely right that that is a thing that happens, but it is not the only path that there can be. So, yeah, you guys here in the chat, you're all saying sort of the same thing, right? And you're all right that the fixture is a thing that has come onto the land, that is attached to the land, right? Ownership of it transfers with the land, and it's a mechanism for depriving someone of their ownership in an item without compensation, right? So these are all, the fixtures doctrine is all about how we take something that is a chattel when it's out in the world and suddenly it becomes part of the realty. This is what the doctrine is about. So let's start with an easy case, okay? Let us start by talking about the house that I rent down in Enterprise, because when you have cats, the price of having a nice place to live is you have to commute forever. People say to me, oh, you've got such a long commute. I drive in 45 minutes and go, this is normal. What can I say? So the house that I rent down in Enterprise, okay? Fixture or chattel? Fixture, right, okay. If there's a hurricane and and one of the windows gets knocked out, and I have to go and buy a new pane of glass to install. When I buy that pane of glass, is it a fixture or a chattel?
Yeah, sure.
Right, exactly right. Okay, exactly right. Yep, you guys in the chat, you're right. You're getting it right as well. Okay. What about the curtains that I hang in front of the window? Because thank you very much, my neighbors don't need to see me walking around in my underwear. So what about the curtains? Fixture or chattel? I'm sorry? Yeah. When I hang it, it becomes a fixture? Maybe.
The curtains are movable, like easily movable, so we need to consistently be on that.
So I think that's probably right. We're going to talk about why as time goes on. But I think that that's the right answer, is that it stays a chattel, never becomes a fixture. Harder question. What about the appliances in my house? Chattels or fixtures? Somebody want to jump in from the Zoom?
What do you mean by appliances? Like the washing machine?
So washing machine, dryer, refrigerator, oven, microwave, chattels or fixtures?
Chattel.
Okay, Why?
Well, you see, for those things, although they are used inside the house for fixture, they may be used or damage doesn't destroy the house itself. Although it may change the kitchen into a beautiful, not necessarily destroy the entire kitchen.
Michelle says unless bolted into the ground, chattels. And Chris says it's not annexed to the house, you can move them at any time, right? I think that these are more or less right answers, right? If I moved in and there were appliances in the house, would I be entitled to remove them?
Are you of the house or are you?
Nope, this is a lease.
Then you will be entitled to remove it.
Okay. Okay, probably right. So I'll tell you guys a home improvement story. When I moved into the house, I own my own laundry machines from an earlier time when I was more prosperous than I am now. And when I went to plug in the dryer, the plug didn't match the outlet that was in the wall. Why doesn't matter, does not matter. So I went to the hardware store and asked the very nice gentleman what I needed to do. And he handed me a new outlet that would match. I had a picture of the plug, so he knew what to look for. Handed me the right outlet. I go home, I swap out the outlet. I turned off the circuit breaker. This is, if you're going to do this yourself, this is an important step. Turn off the circuit breaker. And I swapped out the outlet, and voila, now my dryer plugs in. This outlet that I went and bought and put into the wall, chattel or fixture? Okay, why?
You know, it will be an essential part of the house. Again, we are using the house as a circuit breaker, meaning that it's that important for people to wrong, damage or more. So the fathers will do it for more than just like a space, but actually part of the building. It would be a fixture and chattel.
Okay. I think that's probably right. Okay, I think that's probably right. Here's the question that's really important to me, personally. When I move out of this place, assuming I ever do, can I take that outlet with me? You sure?
Yes.
First of all,
Unless you,
you should not have to even change it on your own in the beginning. You should have exactly the landlord. You have that change.
Well, there's a provision in the lease that I'm responsible for minor maintenance, so that normally I would agree with that, but this specific issue was something that was authorized under the lease. So.
should you put it back on the original one report, then yes, you can take it back. But
Oh yeah, no, I'm not talking about like leaving an empty, like just bare wires in the wall. No. I would put back the original outlet.
Because technically it's not a fixed permanent, so the product could change it, if you're gonna replace it, you're gonna need to.
Okay. So we're going to talk more about this on Thursday when we talk about statutes, but today we're just sort of working through the common law. So I'm seeing, sorry, I stepped away from the chat and I came back to it. And I mean, I think you guys are hitting the right questions in the chat, right? You're asking, is it affixed to the house? You're asking, what's the purpose? You're asking, you're asking, does it change the nature of the thing? You're asking, does removal cause damage? These are all the right questions, okay? In the specific case of, this particular outlet, I think that probably, for reasons we'll discuss on Thursday, the outcome is I can absolutely remove it as long as I put the original back. Um, so here's the hardest case. Let me tell you a story about an old boss of mine. This was when I was practicing law. I was living in Memphis, in Tennessee. The firm I worked for was in Arkansas, about 2.5 hours away. My boss calls me up and he says, Reed, because this is how he talked. Reed, you've been working too hard. I say, Luther, what are you talking about? You've been working too hard. I'm going to send you down to the beach house. And I go, what? What beach house? So he owns a house on the Gulf Coast in Florida, and he has decided that I and my girlfriend at the time are going to go to this beach house for a few days and stay there, and that he is going to pay for everything. And when I finally figured out that he was going to pay for everything, I said, yes, of course, this sounds like a great idea. So we arrive, and we have flown to Florida, and we arrive in the little beach town where this place is, and the cab drops us off at the house. And in the house, in the garage, is a Mercedes-Benz. I call him up and I go, Luther, what's with this car? And he goes, oh, that's so you can get around. Just drive it. It's fine. That's what it's for. Okay. So 3 months later, he fired me. So here's the question. Let's take a look at this Mercedes-Benz. Now, setting aside that it's in the United States, and I'm making no warranties that the doctrine applies in the same way in the US. Assume that we have this case in the Caribbean, okay? Does the Mercedes-Benz become a fixture? Why not?
It's not fixed. Those, it wouldn't alter those using it or moving it from the home itself, doesn't alter the condition of the home. I think
Why? So we've heard an argument for no, that if I understand your argument correctly, basically it's not attached to the house. Now let's hear from the yes.
I think as you put it there, and it's not you who purchases itself, the gas is like chassis.
Mhm.
That would be your home.
I'm sorry, speak up.
I think it attached to the house in a certain instance. So you would might be a picture, but to him it might be a chassis.
Well, so the argument, for those of you who were on Zoom, maybe you may not have heard it, the mic may not have picked it up. The argument is that the character of the car differs depending on who we're dealing with. So for me, as the beneficial user of the house for a weekend, the car is a fixture. For my boss, who owns the house, the car is a chattel. That's the argument. What do we think about that? What do we think? Michaela says that she thinks since the car was lent as part of the beach house, it could be considered a fixture. Go ahead, John. Johnny, you raised your hand. What's up?
I was saying that it is a fixture for you and the boss because you become the temporary owner for the days that you are there?
So, for those of you who may not have understood, I think that what Johnny said is that I think that what Johnny said was that the car's a fixture for both me and my boss because, as he understands it, I own the house. I own the house for the time that I'm there, right? I have this short period lease, set aside the issue of consideration, right? The contract issue, whatever, that I can be characterized as having a lease interest that extends to both the house and the car. What do you think about that? I'm listening.
I don't know if I'm clear because if Money is implying that because he wants it to, or I don't know if I'm lost, because are you then implying, let's say he didn't lend you the house, right? He sold it to you instead, and the car was still in there. Are you then implying that because had you just borrowed it, it would have been a fixture? If when you bought it, it would also be a fixture, like.
See, this is the problem that I have with Johnny's argument, right? This is why I'm not sure I buy Johnny's argument. Sorry, Johnny. For exactly the reason that you say. And this is also why I'm not sure I buy Monique's argument that the character of the asset depends on who's looking at it, okay? Because one of the things that we learned last week, or that I hope we learned last week, maybe I didn't say it explicitly enough, like, because property is an interest that attaches to a thing, the nature of the interest stays the same with regard to the whole world. By the way, this is why Owusu talks about an in rem right as being a right that's enforceable against the whole world, as opposed to being a right that's attached to a thing, which is how Professor Render characterizes it and how I characterize it, right? Is that an in rem right is a right that stays the same regardless of who's looking at it. Okay? So if the car's a fixture when I look at it, it has to be a fixture when my boss looks at it. It has to be a fixture when his business partner comes and looks at it. It has to be a fixture when his neighbor looks at it. By the way, the punchline to all of this is it turned out that my boss's neighbor was about to get foreclosed on, and my boss wanted me to represent the neighbor. So that was why he offered to pay for me to go to the beach house, was so I would meet the neighbor and take on preventing his foreclosure. So, all right, so I'm seeing some things in the chat that are talking about the right sort of issue here. So let me sort of walk you through the doctrine a little bit, right? Because the test for determining whether a chattel becomes a fixture is the intent of the person who brought it onto the land. Now, is that intent objective or subjective? Subjective. You guys are saying subjective, okay, in the chat. Why? Megan, you were the first one to jump in, so please unmute and explain why you think that the question of intent is a subjective one.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good afternoon. I believe that it could be a fixture in the same relation to luxury homes where if there's a $1 million art piece that adds to the value of the home and the seller is selling the home with the art and his intent is for the house to be priced at a certain value because this art is in the home. Yes, it's easily movable as a chattel, but he placed this art in the home so it could add value so that he could get a certain amount from a potential buyer.
Megan, let me ask you a different question because you answered a different question than the one I asked. So let me give you your prize, which is a totally different question altogether. When we're talking about intent,
Right.
what's the difference between subjective intent and objective intent?
Well, when it's objective, you have to go based on the reason of a man, so what everybody else would think, and subjective is what I myself would think in the situation.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So I need you to explain to me why the intent test is subjective. Because I understand your argument related to the piece of art becoming a fixture through the intent to sell the house with the added value of the art. But that doesn't explain whether we look at the subjective intent of the owner or whether we look to the objective intent of the objective intent of the reasonable person in the owner's position.
Well, I believe that the intent is subjective because of the example that I gave. I'm using the same seller and buyer situation with the same, as well as your example. You may look at it as this is your boss's chattel, which is a car, but he may see it as something that adds value to the home.
Okay, so it sounds like, and maybe I'm misunderstanding you, it sounds like you're saying that that the intent can be different depending on the perspective of the viewer.
Yes.
How is that different from what Monique said that would allow property interests to be different depending on who's viewing them?
Well, that's why I'm saying it's subjective.
Okay, so, but we've already discussed that property rights have to be the same for all viewers, right?
Right.
So you already discussed
Okay,
that.
okay, I understand how that sounds contradicting.
So let's see if we can resolve the contradiction. And if we can't, maybe that suggests that the relevant intent test is objective.
I would have to think about it.
Fair enough, fair enough. So let me suggest to you, yeah, I'm sorry, was there a hand?
Something about it do not bring in. I can't remember exactly what they mean, but I remember saying if you do not bring it over, I think it depends on the intentions.
Right,
So, okay, so you didn't bring it up.
that's correct.
I'm supposed to look at it the same way that.
Well, because the ownership interest attaches to the object, and the object doesn't change, okay?
So technically, you are the owner, you have, like, was the.
Yes, to the extent that the house and the car are a package deal, then yes, if we want to describe me as being a leaseholder on the house, then that leasehold extends to the car, right? Again, all of this is to the extent that you're buying this as a package deal. And when I say buy, I mean like accepting in your mind. I don't mean like purchasing, sorry. Okay. So let me purport to you, let me suggest to you that the intent test is objective. What does that mean? How can we determine what the objective intent of a property owner would be? Joshua, I watched you change your mind in the chat. Now I'm gonna make you unmute and explain why you did it.
Okay, so the reason I changed my mind is because when I look at intention, now I'm thinking about, okay, what was your intent? Did you put this object in the house so it could be a part of the overall house, like for long-term use? Or did you just put the object in the house up just for, like, you know, a use that could just, you know, so it could be easily removable? So, for example, a mirror. Like if I put up a mirror in my house and I'm gonna sell the house, and the mirror could be mounted up on, like, let's say a hinge or something, and I could easily remove it. I never really intended it to become like a part of the house. Like it's just there for my personal use. But like if I was to install something like an AC unit where it would be, you know, annexed to the house basically, then I mean, my intention was for it to become like a main part of the house or main feature of the house. So that's why I'm saying it has to be objectively, because, you know, you can see the different levels of intention regardless.
I think that's heading in the right direction. I'll tell you a story from a long, long time ago. My parents have been living in the house that they live in since 1988. And when I was studying real property in law school years ago, my mother told me that when they were in the process of buying their house, there were a number of things that the prior owner insisted were his personal chattel and were going with him. Among those things were, there was a tradition in the neighborhood that every house put out a big wooden sign in the front yard wishing anyone who drove through the neighborhood a Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. And the one that came with our house went with the prior owner. He insisted that he had the right to remove the mantle from over the fireplace. He insisted that he had the right to remove the oven from the kitchen. So are these chattels or are they fixtures? Never mind the American rule, never mind, never mind the jurisdictional issue. Under the doctrine that you guys are learning, chattels are fixtures. So I don't necessarily have a great answer, okay? I think that, because to be perfectly honest, the mantle stayed, the oven stayed, the sign went, okay? I don't know what happened in the process to sort of get to that point, but that was the outcome. I will say, if the sign had had the prior owner's name on it, if it had said, "The Smiths wish you a happy holidays," I would feel very confident in saying that this was a thing that was intended for the personal enjoyment of the owner. It was not intended to run with the land and to travel to subsequent owners. If it did not sort of mention the name of the prior owner, I think it's a closer call, right? I think that then it becomes the question of, it raises the custom and usage issue that Owusu talks about, right? In this neighborhood, this is a custom. Is this something that is sort of attached to the land, since the sign doesn't speak perfectly about a particular person. And yes, Chris, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that we find in the doctrine is actually a burden shifting framework. And I'm not going to explain why, but for reasons related to my own experience and my own practice, I'm particularly interested whenever I see a burden shifting framework. The rule is the chattel attached to the land by more than its own weight? If it is, then it is presumptively a fixture, and the burden lies with the person trying to remove it to prove that it's not. If it is not attached to the land, then it is presumptively not a fixture, and the burden lies on the person attempting to attach it to the land. So, Travis, you had a question?
So it's about like shop crates, like how they just rest on the land. It's not attached by anything that's heavy enough to with attachment, but it's used to this one on the land for storage or.
I'm sorry, what? Yeah, I understood everything you said. I didn't quite catch the word for the thing you're talking about.
Like truck crates.
Okay, sorry, yeah, like a shipping container.
Yeah.
Well, does anyone have an idea for what the doctrine might say according to the reading? Oh, I'm sorry. The question was not heard on Zoom. The question was, we're thinking about an object like a shipping container, something that sort of holds itself by its own weight, doesn't move around, okay, but has the capacity to be moved given sufficient equipment. Is it affixed to the land? What do we think? Maisha says no. Was there someone live who said something? Okay. Maisha, why don't you unmute and tell us what you think?
Okay. I say no because it never became a part of the land. It can be, but it never was. And it's not whether or not something can, but it's whether or not it is.
I think that's right. There's a number of cases cited in the Owusu. And by the way, let me just sort of say this as an aside. I read the Owusu reading sort of for the first time in any sort of detail. Wow, that's a bad book. Wow, I don't know why we use it. We're going to work on that. But so I apologize for that, but I don't have any control over the books that we use. But I think that's right? I think there's a number of cases that are quoted in the Owusu that an item that is held in place by its own weight is not affixed to the land. Okay, now that does not resolve the question of whether it's a chattel or whether it's a fixture, right? It does that. We still have to question intent, but it does allocate the burden, right? I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. No. It does allocate the burden, and so in the case of the shipping container, as Travis points out, the burden lies on the person who wants to call it a fixture, because it is not affixed to the land, okay? Yes, Monique.
So I think I was having a very foolish, right? So you said the owner of the Mercedes said it was the Guarana, And that's why Adelia said it would be Chatham. But in my head, he was the owner, so to me, it seemed as a fixture. So in this instance, would it be Chatham, would be like, guys letting me serve for me when you go to the owner and stuff like that for that short period of time? Ownership, it doesn't really need to be actual physical ownership or it can be a short period.
So I think you're starting to get the right idea, right? The question with regard to the Mercedes is, what did my boss intend for the Mercedes to do? Did he want the Mercedes to just sort of be in the beach house for anyone who used the beach house to be able to use? Or did he have other intentions, right? And that's, so, and this is why objective intent matters. What if, based on the conversation that my boss and I had over the Mercedes, and based on the conversation that we've had about the affiction and the intent tests, I feel relatively confident saying that in this particular case, the Mercedes would be a fixture. But let's change things a little bit. What if, instead of the boss just saying, hey, you go down to the beach house, he said, why don't we go down to the beach house? And I go down there with his family. We'll set aside the awkwardness of that, but let's assume it. And we get down there and he goes, oh yeah, this is my first Mercedes that I bought with my first big trial verdict. And I'm leaving it down here for now, but I'm gonna give it to my son when he's old enough to drive. Does that change the intent? Maybe, right? Because the question is objective. It's not what his intent was, it's what would be the intent of the reasonable person in his circumstance. Okay? So I think that his intent, his subjective intent, becomes evidence, but doesn't necessarily prove the objective question. Okay? All right. Okay. Marissa, email me about the book and I will make an announcement on e-learning. Ty, we'll talk about that on Thursday. Tiffany, you're absolutely right. The issue is the issue of intent. Okay? We are out of time. It sure looks like the next class is getting ready to shove us on out the door. Guys, thanks so much for your effort and your engagement, and I'll see you guys on Thursday when we will wrap up a couple of things related to the common law. We'll talk about some statutory stuff, and then we'll move into the articles that are assigned for this unit on the syllabus. So see you guys. For those of you who see you in tutorials tomorrow, I'll see you tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll see you on Thursday. Sorry.